Hello.
Morning.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm flooded
Hmm.
with emotions on everything. It's summer holiday, and I just said, you know, farewell to 13 beautiful souls who graduated and gone off to college. And so a lot of emotions processing around that. And
Mm,
I it's I mean it's four sometimes four between 4.5 years with his kiddos and their families. And to say farewell is very emotional.
I can imagine. And I guess that kind of your that leads really into what I was thinking about today from your Substacks this week. And the reason it's so hard is for that strong attunement that has been created by yourself and those students and their families as well. How, you've often described to me how your parent sessions with your students' parents and what that sounded like, looked like, the timing, the information you provided. But I think it's just so relevant to, when we think about, as a speech and language therapist, when I'm thinking about communication, actually, way before that is attunement. And I really liked the description this week about empathy and attunement. And actually, it isn't about empathy. It's not about understanding somebody else's or feeling the same way as they're feeling. It's that I'm curious. I want to learn. I hear you. I see you. Your thoughts, feelings are valid. And I guess that's where we start off with, whether it be a student in high school, an adult that, like you and I communicating, or myself with a preschooler. Attunement is just so important.
Aye, it is. And I think, for your kiddos, for my kiddos, they come into my classroom, to your clinic, and they might think, you know, I experience the whole of it. As soon as I walk in, I experience your
Mm,
room, my classroom. The whole of it arrives first. Can I see myself here? Does that feel right? What is coherent, what is incoherent? And I think
mm,
in the ecology of my classroom, being intentional about that, thinking about who's going to occupy that space, that I cannot achieve what I'm trying to achieve if attunement is not there, if we're not
yeah.
attuned to each other. And it cannot be like, here I am, Dr. H, and you must do these things and you must do them in these orders. And
Mm,
that's where I end up clashing with my colleagues in the mathematics department and that's the kind of behind the story of maths, where some students need to receive the whole of it. This is what we're doing. This is,
yeah.
this is the unit circle. This is, the transformation of functions. This is what it means in real life. What does it mean to transform functions? If you don't have that gestalt, what do you do? You just kind of sit there and hum. If you're ADHD,
Yeah.
you're banging away with your pencils and stuff, right? And so I try to build that attunement to say, it's not just here's a worksheet about the transformation of functions. What do you notice? What do you not wonder? Take some notes in the margin and I'll get back to you in 5 minutes. That's not how it works, right? So I try to find, different students that have their different interests. One student, for example, very much into like DJing and wanting to be a producer and,
Mm,
electronic music. And so, the transformation of functions for me, explaining to him is a music lesson. Here's how you're shifting pitch and varying all of these things on your mix board. Well, you're transforming functions. These are, input output devices. And so in comes this signal, you transform it, out comes this wonderful beat and stuff. Oh, okay, Dr. H, I get it now. And now I can work with it. So I give him the
mhm.
whole of it, and now he can work with it in context in his mind. He has something to scaffold it. And I think, when we talk about attunement in education or in clinical practice, we'll
Mm,
have to know a little of the backstory of the people that we work with to know how to
mm,
make these stories happen. And so I think there's a bit of that in the series that's, wrapping
mm.
itself up.
I think it's interesting. I I no longer feel like I do work in a clinic. I feel that there is the speech den space, and it's so, that my title therapist, speech and language therapist, and working in a clinic where it kind of like feels as far removed from attunement from where we started than it possibly could be. And thinking about some of the little tiny children that come in, and prior to them attending, we send out some forms for parents to complete. And one of them is, what does your child really like doing? And for some that might be really obvious, like Peppa Pig or dinosaurs or the Gruffalo book. For others, it might be, oh, they like being, physical play. They like, so before that child arrives, we are looking for opportunities to create attunement. So the number of parents that walk through the door and go, oh, he loves all of these things. And I'm just thinking, well, it's not really by accident. This is absolutely been set up so that your child can and yourself can be as comfortable as possible. So to start, like we were saying, now I can't remember whether it's before we started recording or after we started recording, because of our conversations about you said, Jamie, and this is again, it just really made me reflect on how we sort of support children. Is whenever you walk into a room, you feel the ecology, you feel the whole of it, and so creating that space that do we need to draw the curtains and have some softer lighting on because actually that's something that the child shows a preference for? Do we need some heavy duty sort of things to lift, or I don't know, like a yoga ball to bounce on? Or do we need Hot Wheels? Do we need Play-Doh? What is it we need? And so every time, and because also I'm not just thinking about it for that first opportunity that we meet, but how those things can change over time as well. So reattuning into the child as well.
Right. I think there's an aspect of, yeah, we deal with children, but I also deal with adults. I deal with parents, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes a student will come to me and the eligibility for services will be specific learning disability, not autism. But then you do a deep dive into the package and your kind of initial data analysis, and they say, oh, parent reports sibling has autism, right? Those words, parent reports sibling has autism. And then deeper down, it's male sibling, and I'm looking at a female student. And so it's like the same traits are not described the same way, females versus males. And okay, so I have a conversation with a student and I'm asking them questions, their access to diagnosis limited because they can chit chat. They chat to a friend. I know I've been saying this for a while,
Mm,
but I can see traits, right? But it's not just that. It's how they make meaning, right? How the architecture of their mind makes the meanings. And
yeah.
then so we discuss, that individualized aspect of their education and how I'm going to work with them and tailor things. And then we meet with parents and my first question in my mind is which one of these two or both are autistic, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes, the parents they're high masking, or they don't have access to like within their culture, they don't have access to these kind of discussions. And
Mm,
so I will start kind of question and answer about how do you like this? How do you like that? How does your daughter like this and like that? And are you the same or different? And then, I'm a PhD. I'm not one of those kinds of doctors, so I can't offer diagnosis, but I would just, kind of gently suggest, have you ever considered that you might also be autistic and what that might mean for you? And, you
mm,
know, I think, that's kind of like recognizing like. And it's
Hmm.
not, a naysayer saying, well, if you didn't score this on the RADs, then obviously you're not autistic. It's like, no, that's not how it works, you know. But I can ask questions about patterns and atmospheres and, how do you like the lighting in your living room? And what
Yeah.
about, your time management, and how does language and how do you experience language? And, what's your memory space like, in one of my favorite questions, if you have language in your dreams, in what language do you dream? Right. And more often than not, it's not English, right? And so that has
Mm.
implications for education, right? And that's part of that continuity between the school site and the home site, right?
Mm.
Because if everything that we do and everything that we do is in English, and we send English homework home, but the language, the atmosphere of the home is not English, how are they being supported? Right? These
Hmm.
are all questions that I'm trying to get to.
Mm.
We want to saturate their learning environment with meaningful inputs and comprehensible inputs. But then the discussion around, if their memory space is, for example, Spanish, but they've never progressed past like a year two level of Spanish, then how can I hang year 10 academic vocabulary on that? There's no translation, there's no bridge. And so we talked with parents about, the whole home language, building everybody's, academic language as best as we can.
Mm.
And so that translation that happens, it gets easier over time. And then eventually, once you have all of these things in place, then you can have coherence.
Yeah.
But if all of these things are missing because we are calling it the wrong thing, then it's very hard for a youngling to build coherence in their life.
Hmm.
I can say things to the seniors, at the beginning of the year, like, oh, you want to go to this school? I've been there. It's hectic. It's chaotic. Have you been there? No, no, Dr. H, never been there. Maybe you should go visit. And then they go and visit and they take the tour and they come back and they say, no, that's not for me. Thank you for telling me, but that's not for me. Right. And you can kind of feel, in their mind, the future is arriving to them. Like, oh wow, I did a big adult thing. I went and checked something out and I said it's not for me, and now I'm making choices. And I think that's the beautiful thing about coherence is you can have those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. But you can only have those conversations when you've created that initial attunement with them,
Aye,
when there's felt safety, when um, you know the whole of them,
aye,
and not just well, they're very bright. They could go, they could achieve academic results that would end up in them going to this college. But actually, it's not about that. It's about knowing that person and what kind of situation. And I think going back to what you were saying about parents, about um, how important it is um, to really listen to parents, to listen to how they see their child through their eyes for their child, their whole life, because it's different from that little person or that bigger person that is standing in front of you or myself. And parents have so much information and know their child better, can advocate for them, um, and sort of really not always being the expert, I think is really important as well, because those kind of like systems of power, as soon as you or I step into our role as speech and language therapist, as teacher, tutor, educator, for many parents, we immediately are in that role of power, when actually what we need is attunement with the parents so that we can
right.
work together. See, I got there in the end. I could see your face, and I
No,
was thinking, you're thinking, where on earth is she going with this? Where on earth is she going with
on,
it?
well, I've seen the previews, so I know where this is going. But yes, and I think, the more we know the family, the children, the more attuned we are, the more that we can help them to see the whole of it. I think
Mm.
about one student, and there's something that she wanted to do as career. And as soon as she kind of discovered it as a child, how they were doing movement therapy and stuff like that. And she's very sensory seeking, very touchy, and in her culture and in school culture, kind of touchy and stuff is discouraged. And so she felt, in our clinical language, a bit touch starved. And so now she's growing up and now she wants to know what to do, but she has to pitch it to her parents and stuff. And and so part of that kind of translation labor of, let me describe the whole of it to you first. You can go to this particular city college and they have a wonderful kinesiology program. And you can learn how the body operates and how the muscles work together. And you can do all of this wonderful science thing, and you can be a physical therapist. Um, and says she to me, "Oh, Dr. H, but I love massage. I love massage. I want to." Wait, your mother's never going to go for that, right? But you can get your education out of the way. You can learn how the body moves, and then you have time to kind of build that, those scripts to deal with your family and stuff.
Mm.
But in the meantime, you're learning this wonderful science of physical therapy that a lot of people really need help with, especially older people and people are aging and stuff. So it's a really good place to go career wise, as the baby boomers are aging and they're needing this, come on, ma'am, let's help you get off to the chair and all that kind of stuff. Um, but helping, not just, I know you see a lot of the younger ones, but in the teenage years, we still need to help them with scripts. We still need to help them
Mm.
to see the whole of it. The scripts just get more complicated, but they're still
Yeah.
necessary.
And I was having this conversation with another speech and language therapist a few months back about how actually we depend on script because our language has changed as I've, I guess, reflected and learnt, and through our conversations and through conversations around um, writing reports that are neurodiversity affirming, about going into schools and thinking about really choosing my language carefully. And I'm really reliant on scripts now, really reliant on them for many different aspects of my, yeah, of the work that I do, and less so, I guess, within the sort of my own little social context. Um, but sometimes out of that social context, ones that I'm really familiar with, I am still, yeah, I do think about it. And then I think, does everybody do this? Like rehearse conversations? And I'm not sure they need to spend quite as much detail on it as maybe I do. But anyway, sorry, I am really squirreling today.
Aye, well, you might be a Gestalt processor if you're running scripts in your head ahead of meetings. I hate to be all clinical with you, but have you considered that?
You never
You
know.
know, I do think it's funny, and I have a script that I run when parents or colleagues, say that. I say, tell me you're autistic without telling me you're autistic, right?
Yeah.
And you have all of these, things that you think are peculiar or whatever, but they're just, I guess, ecological conditions. This is how we function.
And I guess to a certain extent, I didn't know that everybody else didn't do that. As in, sort of, I remember having a conversation with a friend and just saying, like, oh, yeah, I planned out exactly what I was going to say. And they sort of like looked at me as if I was, and I would be sort of, yeah, oh my goodness. Anyway, I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole. So,
So I think, a lot of those kind of questions, like I know enough to not go down those, you know, tell me how you're feeling kind of
yeah,
questions. What do you think about that? Those WH questions, I know I've beat those to death on the outside about
yeah,
how I don't really fancy those, but um, I I'm a bit more cognizant now in my practice where when I first started, and kind of along those lines of, I'm brand new to the K through 12 space and I'm presented with, year 4, year 5, emotionally disturbed, some with traumatic brain injury and all this kind of stuff. And I'm terrified. What if I do the wrong thing? And I'm having panic attacks over running all of these scrapes. What if this happens? What if that happens? And then, I finally meet them in the classroom, and I feel kind of overjoyed that we're in this shared space, and we can make meanings together. I'm just kind of flowing with it, and all of this stuff that they shove into you in teacher training, and just starts to kind of flow away. And it's like, all right, Jamie, just be yourself, be yourself, and
Yeah,
just these are human beings. They have wants, they have needs, they have just like you. So let's just have conversations. Yeah, they're year four, and yeah, they're you know this disability. What just let's just chat to them and find out.
yeah.
Right.
And I think that's whether you're a teacher or a speech and language therapist, and how my training at university was as far removed from what I'm doing now as it possibly could be. And I think that, sort of for me, it's been quite a huge learning, huge reflecting process about how about being curious instead of going in with now and next boards, instead of going in with, oh, they're 3 years old. I know what they'd like to play with. They'd like to play with Peppa Pig and the doll's house and maybe a baby. Going in with all those assumptions rather than what I'm now doing is gathering information beforehand, watching, observing, talking, not talking, just sitting and just sharing space, and looking at the impact that that has. And just as you've described the impact it's had on your relationships, I really feel like exactly the same way. And there's like no going back once you've experienced it. And I don't know, it's like it is for me, it's been like a whole body experience, and as well.
Yes. What is the ecology of the space? How do we
Yeah.
feel in it?
Yeah.
And I get in trouble with my colleagues when I start talking that way because
Hmm.
we sit through meetings. Your scores for your student population are so low. Um, what can we do to boost up the test scores?
Yeah.
Can we talk about the ecology of the testing experience? Can we talk about the testing platform? Can we maybe assess them differently? No, we must do this. Well, then it's not going to change. Sorry,
No.
that's just the way it is. Um, and when we start seeing, not just inputs and outputs of, the students go into this room and they output this test score and stuff, but when we
Mm.
start seeing them as, kind of the whole of them,
Yeah.
the whole feelings that they have, and they don't. Even my journey with ADHD, your journey with ADHD, nobody talks about, like, in standardized testing, I have a question and then a rapid change of subject. I have another question and then another rapid change of subject.
Mm.
There's that PDA, there's that attention, there's that
Yeah.
having to kind of resettle. Okay, what do I need to know? I have to build this whole scrape library for this
Yeah.
question. And the
Yeah.
majority of the American standardized platforms, they they encode that delay as deficit. And so
Mm.
then the next question that the student will get is at a lower level, and it will
Right.
never rise back up. And so when you see a student, kind of reorienting after everything, by the time they're done with the testing experience, they're having kindergarten kind of questions, but they can still answer calculus. They're just
Yeah.
slower. And it really punishes. And when I try to have these conversations about these platforms, the naysayers come out. Right?
Do you know, it's really interesting because just what you said then just reminds me of something that Libby Hill wrote literally in a post today or yesterday. And it was about, she was writing a report. Um, so for those, sorry, for listeners who perhaps don't know who Libby Hill is, she's a really respected speech and language therapist in the UK, and runs a company called Small Talk. And she wrote a sort of summary of her report for tribunal, and it talked about this young person's strengths and their ability to recall detailed information around specific topics that far exceeded their age and ability, that indicated that they had a huge potential. But what you've just described and what we know about some of our assessments that we might do is they're not geared towards, the this Gestalt processes. So actually, on paper, it might look as though they're failing. And if people are just listening to this, I've just been doing with my in inverted commas, um, when actually it's the testing that's failing them, not the other way around.
Right. Right. And I know on my side, there's an aspect of emotional regulation that's missing because
Mm,
our tests, they sometimes throw completely, random things in that,
yeah.
they understand, the system understands the age and grade level of the student being assessed.
Mm,
And the system will throw in random stuff that for their year they've not been exposed to yet. And
yeah.
so the student is usually very well meaning. It's like, oh crap, I don't know this. And then the panic sets in. And what about this? So they start doing that script. So is it this? Is it that? Is it that? And it completely shuts them down. And when I ask, can we not do that? The answer is no, because the system is purchased as is and so on. And so in the lead up to these, basically the end of March through the beginning of May is just wall to wall testing here.
Mm,
But I will just create scripts and for them in their head. The sum of all probabilities is one. Just say that with me. The sum of all probabilities is one. And so that way, when they get to a probability question, the probability of rain is 3/5. What's the probability of no rain? They say, oh, well, Dr. H said the sum of all probabilities is one, so I'll choose this. Right? I've never taught them probabilities or whatnot. But I can give them the scripts and they're smart and they can recall them and stuff.
mm,
Um, I just try to create that, in their minds that they're very smart and to not be discouraged by these things.
mm,
But, here in our system, when they take this, this test in year 11, it places them in college in their maths and their English classes. And so if they panic and they do really poorly, then that costs them so much time because they're given all these remedial courses they may not need, but they have to take them now because it's set in stone. And so these are the kind of disadvantages when the dominant system assumes there is one mental ecology. It doesn't consider that, there are other possible organizations of consciousness and coherence. And so we have those conversations, the students and myself and the parents about, test taking strategies and organizational things on how to organize,
mm.
to deliver what the system wants. And at the end of the year, I'm tired.
Yeah, well, you give so much, and it's not just teaching, it's giving of yourself, but also I just sat here thinking, gosh, I wish you had taught my kids. I wished I'd been taught by somebody like you who explains in such a way and creates that calmness, but understanding of each individual student, that sees each individual student as an individual, that you're curious, you're asking, what does this person need, not rather than, what does this person need to do to fit the system. You flip it completely, and my goodness, very excited about your book. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I just have to finish the layout of that, and then behind that is so you think differently, and behind that is, the story of maths. And I've been in kind of discussions with professional folks around that about designing the story of maths not as I mean, yes, as a maths book, but to organize it in the way that my district does, like new classes, how you propose a new
Mm,
section. And I've got it wrapped in my mind that it's not a maths class, it's a humanities class because it wraps in history and language and, you know, obviously mathematics, but um, that story aspect, that kind of backstory stuff, and to kind of pitch it to schools
yeah.
where they have very low math scores. Well, why do you think you have very low math scores? Show me how you teach probabilities, and let's have a discussion. And so kind of letting the Gestalt processing way kind of lead the way back to coherence for the system to say, we have lost our we've lost the plot, right? We we have this population, maybe 40-45%, that are dragging our numbers down. How do we bring them down? Well, let me tell you about that, right? In a probability problem, you know, what does one equal? Well, one equals this will happen, right? So the probability of sun rising tomorrow is one. Well, what about the sun not rising tomorrow or ever? What's the probability of that? Well, that's zero, right? It's never going to happen. Well, what about, Peppa Pig coming to life and serving me tea? Well, there's a non-zero probability of that. That's right. Can it say it never happens? But it's very, very low, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we can chuckle about it, we can have a laugh about it. But the way the system does it here is it starts them with mathematics right away,
Mm,
and it
same here.
overwhelms them, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And I've been in conversations like, standard deviation and stuff. Why are we focusing initially on this very long form equation on how to calculate standard deviation? Why don't we have a story first? Why
Mm,
don't we build in like a spreadsheet that has that function built in and show them how it works and how to build the kind of tables and stuff? And then we can talk about how to calculate it.
yeah.
And that part of, from a few years ago, talking about why I can buy shoes at Walmart. Right. And putting that visual in the children's head because, Walmart doesn't sell size 17 because I'm, three or four standard deviations from the normal population. And so that's cemented in their mind. Here's Dr. H, 2 meters tall, gigantic feet, never seen somebody that tall in my life. And now I understand standard deviation because her shoes are so big, and that kind of stuff. Um, I think that's very important with Gestalt processors to create that storyful backstory that they can put in their head and it will stick.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. Jamie, I feel like I've been talking for quite a while now. Feels like a good time to pause and um still, yeah, and look forward to next weekend. Thank you. It's been a really lovely conversation. I've enjoyed it, and as always, take so much away to think about and reflect on. And already my brain's squirreling for next week.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Thank you so much. See you next week.
All right. See you next week. Bye bye.
Bye.